there, and welcome to the Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. I'm your host, Vidas Pinkevicius. Today's guest is Tom Trenney, an American organist and improviser who is known for his engaging improvisations on hymns, submitted themes, silent films, scripture, poetry, and artwork. And he became the first organist to be awarded the first prize and audience prize in the American Guild of Organists National Competition in Organ Improvisation in 2006. Tom has performed at Royce Hall, the Schermerhorn Symphony Hall, Benaroya Hall in Seattle, Ocean Grove Auditorium in New Jersey, Portland Municipal Auditorium in Maine, Spreckels Organ Pavilion, San Diego, and Verizon Hall at Kimmel Center, Philadelphia, and has served as organist and clinician at regional and national conventions of the American Guild of Organists, and the Organ Historical Society, and the Presbyterian Association of Musicians, the Association of Lutheran Church Musicians, National Association of Pastoral Musicians, the Fellowships of United Methodists in Music and Worship Arts, and the Calvin Institute of Worship. In general, he is so inspiring improviser and musician and communicator that you will see in our conversation that Tom, who is a living representation of what's possible in the world of improvisation, he will definitely inspire you at least to come out of your fears, right, and try out the new ideas that you can create the music in the moment. In this conversation, Tom teaches you, and you will discover the ways of how can you be less scared of improvising in the moment. Let's go to the show. So, Tom, I'm so delighted to be able to talk to you. You're such an inspiration to all the improvisation lovers in the world, organ improvisations, who admire you for the art you do, right? I think we met maybe 12 years ago, maybe more, maybe 14 years ago in Eastern Michigan University. Do you remember the time when Pamela Reuter-Finstra organized one of her improvisation symposiums? And
I do, yeah. What a great event.
Yeah. And at one time you were participating, and David Hurd was teaching, right?
That's correct, yeah.
And I remember those fantastic modes that you were playing with your, I don't know, both feet probably. You made canon seem so easy, you know. You were playing, I don't know, maybe 6-voice texture somehow. It was sort of unbelievable at that age to do this. You were very, very young, at least seemed that way. So thank you so much for being such an inspiration one more time, and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege.
Great. Of course, a lot of things have changed from that day, from that our meeting, right? And let's start, of course, with our feeling we had when we were listening to you when you were performing these canons. You know, everyone participating in the symposium was sort of very interested in improvisation, but at the same time quite scared of it. You know, did you notice that when you were playing those canons and fantasies on the organ, around you there was an atmosphere of, I don't know, tension, because we were holding our breath and rooting for you, you know. So did you remember that feeling or not? Probably not.
I absolutely. You know, it's interesting some of the words you use to describe it. I sometimes think of improvisation as pushing us as musicians to an even more vulnerable place than we're ordinarily expected to go. And golly, it does take a lot of courage, I think, and in just having a trust in the spirit in some sense, because as a musician, you love that sensation of I've practiced so well, I know what it's going to feel like to do this and so on. And as an improviser, we prepare and practice and experiment, but in any given moment, we can't necessarily call upon the spirit to do the exact thing we want it to do. So there is a bit of mystery, I think, but I've always been so inspired by that place of wonder that happens, between our brains and the keyboard, in those kind of creative moments, and so I often encourage people to say, to take that risk and to see what happens, and to know if it's no good, well, you don't have to do it again.
Right. It takes a lot of courage, right, to improvise, probably for some people. And do you have an idea why some people are so scared of improvisation?
Well, I think in some ways it may go back to people's initial experiences with music, where we look at it, if they're taught in a certain way, you look at a sheet of music, and when you play this note, you push down this. When you see this note, you push down this key, and when your thumb gets here, you move it underneath, and things are so specific. And I was fortunate to be invited as a young pianist to learn from the Suzuki method, which was newer in those days for piano anyway. And of course, the idea of that is for learners who may not be as adapted to visual learning as they are to trusting the ear. And so I think for somebody like me, that was such a gift to learn what things sound like, and then to translate that into what they feel like on the keyboard. And so I feel grateful for kind of having stumbled upon that before I would have known any better, or to known what even to look for in the first place. So I think we're all tipped in different learning styles, and I was fortunate to be invited to that method, which I think then led to my openness in those spontaneous moments for improvisation.
Right. And what happened later? How were you introduced to pipe organ?
Yeah, I sang in a men and boy choir while I was, I think it was in 3rd or 4th grade that I joined, and we had a fantastic Ian Skinner organ in our church, and a wonderful organist who also conducted the choir, often from the console. And actually, I was quite taken with the idea of being a choir director, but my role model was one who played the organ and conducted, and I kind of assumed that was what one would have to do. So one thing leads to another, and I started to take organ lessons, and when you're a teenager, nobody wants you to conduct them yet. So I ended up focusing in my organ playing for a good while, and then let the other one come back into the equation when it was the right time. So it's sure been most of my life that the organ has been a part of the music that has been most inspiring to me.
Right. Of course, when you are so young, this first experience will stay you probably for a long time, right? And maybe inspire you to pursue further organ studies, right? For most of people. And if we are lucky, we meet a person in our lives early on, right? A generous person, sometimes from the clergy, sometimes a local organist, right? Who introduces the organ to us, maybe takes us inside of the instrument, right? Takes the organ apart a little bit. And it's so tremendously important, right? To open up the secrets of the organ, of this grand instrument, and sometimes people get hooked by the mystery of it, right?
I think you're absolutely right, and I was very blessed that our organist and choir master, his name's Brian Mitnall, and he's now at St. Mark's in Shreveport, Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
But he was in Paynesville, Ohio, of all places at that time, and he was very generous to allow me to explore the organ and to give me some of my first lessons. Then I was growing up right about the time the pipe organ encounters that the American Guild of Organists sponsors were coming to be. And so I attended many of those as a teenager and was just fascinated to meet other people my age, as well as to have the opportunity as a teenager to meet and hear many of the great organists that were around, teaching in the colleges and playing in the significant churches. And so what a gift that all was to inspire me to find my path and discern and discover my calling to be a church musician and to be an organist. I'm so thankful, as you say, for those early experiences and for those generous people who take us by the hand and give us a chance to see what might be there for us to share.
Well, exactly. And AGO's initiative, Pipe Organ Encounters, that's such a wonderful and tremendously important work in not only promoting the work, but also spreading the love for this instrument and inspiring young people like you, right, and like me to pursue further studies. That's probably priceless idea. Whoever thought of this first is I think deserved to be carved in gold letters in the AGO's Hall of Fame or something. Right.
I think that's right. If that was the only thing our National Organ Guild was doing, why, it would be worth all the effort of having the organization. And so I totally agree with you. What a powerful witness that's been to keeping good things going. And I think, as I said in another way, I think it's really helped for younger people to find their way to have a community early on in this kind of weird thing that, especially growing up in a small town, and I didn't know anyone else anywhere near my age that had an interest in this thing. But to have the chance in the summer to spend a week with those people, and then to be able to talk with them and connect with them and see, where are you going to school? What are you playing? It was tremendously helpful in making me feel part of a community. And I think the organ and church music world continues to feel like kind of a big neighborhood, even today. So grateful to be a part of it.
Exactly, Tom. And how about improvisation? Was improvisation also a part of POP curriculum?
Yeah, I think to some extent I recall that it was. In some ways, I do know in my first pipe organ encounter, I got connected with Ann and Todd Wilson, who ended up becoming my teachers and mentors. And I do know for sure in so many of my lessons with them at the POEs and beyond, that improvisation was encouraged to be kind of part of the nuts and bolts of what we did, instead of only looking at literature. And so I think they were very generous too to see that interest in me and that potential, and to help me figure out some ways to focus and harness it and so on. As I was growing and learning.
Did you have more curiosity about improvisation or more fear about it? Do you remember the feeling at the beginning?
I don't remember being afraid of it. I think I remember even as kind of a young person hearing a melody on a video game I'd be playing on the Atari. I'm giving away my era now. On the Atari or
right.
Something like that, and then I would go to the piano, and that melody would be in whatever kind of context seemed appropriate at the time. And I remember my parents would sometimes be fascinated about that, but to me it was almost like it felt more like you know, as you learn what different colors are, you get a sense when you're coloring in a picture of what colors kind of belong together or in certain ways, and sometimes they get a little blurred, and that's what musical sounds got to be like for me, that certain things just kind of fit together. And of course, at that moment, I didn't really know what to call any of those things or how to, the terminology for it and that kind of thing. And later I learned at least some of that, you know, going to school and trying to unpack it. But I don't think I was ever afraid. And so I think one of the things I've realized in trying to teach sometimes is, for people who are, it's difficult for me to identify with that kind of initial fear, and so I have to be very mindful of thinking of ways to help that are very non-judgmental, and that are, you know, and that the kind of easy ways to dip people's feet in the pool before they're comfortable to kind of plunge in. So
yeah,
I do try to be very mindful of that.
You mentioned plunging in, right? But you also mentioned dipping our toes, right? It's another way. It's like wading, right? Plunging, taking a plunge, or wading very slowly. Both methods can be quite successful, but for some people, they need to, take in a step-by-step fashion, a little bit, take it easy at first, right? And while others like yourself probably would jump right in and play 3-part canons right away, you know.
Right. Yeah. No, I think, and I think it's important to for people to realize that sometimes they think of improvisation as, you know, being the guy who at the end of the concert gets an envelope full of themes and suddenly this incredible multi-movement work emerges. But, you know, improvisation is a lot more than just that. It can be very small kinds of things, but that are very personal and meaningful. And I think it's important to me to encourage people to realize, you know, everybody has music inside of them that nobody else can make quite that same way. And I think if we're willing to access that vulnerable place, even if it's in our own practice room, you know, and not necessarily in front of people, at least at first, I think we'll be surprised what's trying to come out and figuring out how to allow it to come out. I think of improvisation and music in general less like some, you know, I think of it like the sculpture. It's not as though you're going to paste a nose onto your sculpture, but instead you're going to try to take away the stuff that's getting in the way of our seeing that, you know, that beautiful part of the art kind of emerging. And so stripping away our anxieties and our fears and our, you know, our self-checking and all of that, and just seeing what happens and then figuring out how to evaluate and grow from there is, I think, is very important for us.
Right, because you can start in a quite friendly way, right? You can limit your techniques that you are exposed to, right? At first, maybe you can improvise just using one note, right? Simple C notes here. And then slowly, week by week, you can add another note, right? And another. When you have a few notes, you can add a mode like this, and little by little, somebody like person who is really initially afraid, but after a few months, his or her perspective about improvisation really can change 180 degrees, probably.
I absolutely agree. You know, I often talk in workshops and things about having thinking about improvisation. If you are afraid, especially, but even if you're not, thinking more about the melody for a while than we tend to. And I think so many of us who are more advanced, we start thinking of forms and harmonies and all of these things. But there's a tremendous amount we can learn from improvising with only a melody. and so focusing on some of those basics can be very meaningful, I think, and open our minds in ways that we'd be surprised, and no matter where we're coming from. And I think, another thing that's become very clear to me when we're open to improvisation and thinking about creativity, what are we going to do with this melody? How is this melody's shape and peculiar energy going to come to life in our improvisation? Well, then we look at all the music we play through a different set of eyes, thinking about what's the composer showing us and the way they've chosen to illustrate this melody and to dress it and to accompany it. And to me, as we spend time thinking about improvisation, in a way, we're also thinking about the whole realm of musicianship and composition. And I think that can have a tremendous impact on our interpretation of repertoire, even as it feeds us, particularly as an improviser.
Exactly. I remember Bill Porter once told us during, I think, one master class about improvisation, that the more he thinks about it, the more he believes that anything that can be written down really can be improvised as well. Do you agree with this idea?
I think, at least in general, I think that the idea for the improvisation is essentially that we're composing in real time, and we're not having the ability to go back with the eraser and undo, but we're also not withheld by what we might have thought at one point before we put the pencil down. This is kind of an incredible continuum in the moment. I think, people ask me sometimes, you haven't written any organ music. Why wouldn't you write down some of your improvisations? And, part of me thinks when I improvise, that felt really good in that moment, but when I think about sitting down to write it out, I'm not sure it necessarily is something that matters to somebody else in a different moment. That to me, the distinguishing thing is not the craft of composition versus improvisation, but the purpose. The composition is meant to last. It's something that we're putting down that we think is going to have sort of something that's going to matter to somebody over time, have value, ongoing value. The improvisation is something that we heighten to fit in whatever moment it might be made for. And so I think that kind of purpose is what distinguishes them to me, rather than the quality or craft of them.
But you're not saying that improvisers don't write down things as exercises, right? You probably also are working out sometimes with fugue subjects, right? Like canons, also other technical things, harmonizations, right? Writing down things, because it must be helpful, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think, I think what I mean is, it's better to write down improvisations before you do them than after you do them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. In other words, if it helps us to have a plan, something like that, I think you're absolutely right. It's a risk worth taking. But I don't think of improvisations that I do anyway of being something that I necessarily would want to play again or to have someone play again. That's what I was thinking.
Right, because if you are writing down the things that you played just a moment ago, right, with the intention of playing them again, then why would you do this? Because you in an hour you can improvise anything like you want, right? Something differently,
Sure.
Right. It's like public speaking, right? Speaking in public. Some people do memorize things and memorize speeches, but others improvise, and that's very different when people listen to memorized speech right? Even though it's
Mm-hmm.
performed with a vigor, with intensity, with very very good performance skills, right? Public performance. But on the other hand, if you wing it, if you do it uniquely just once, right, and never do it again
Mm-hmm.
the same way, it elevates, I think, your performance in a level that nobody else can replicate, right? But you,
Mm-hmm.
at this moment only.
I think that's true. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think that's true, and I think, you know, if we want to grow as improvisers, the danger is, you know, especially for if we might happen to be one who's more, what do I want to say, whose talent at it is fairly present. I think it can become difficult for us to grow at some point, and what we end up doing is kind of just keep quoting ourselves and, you know, putting a different theme in the same old thing that we kind of intuitively can do.
Mhm.
And so I think for me the challenge is, and the beautiful possibility always is, looking at each individual tune melody and trying to figure out what it's wanting to do in that particular moment instead of what we can do to it. And so it becomes less click and drag and more, you know, I've never seen this file before. What can it be? That's the part that excites me. But it's also the part that's, again, that's the part that levels us. If we're always willing to be vulnerable to what we can do in a moment instead of just to trust what we know we've done before, it makes us all kind of have that edge, and nobody's really nobody's more prepared for that than anybody else. Nobody's really skilled to that more than anyone else. We all just figure it out in our own way.
That's exactly what Marcel Dupré would describe as improvisation in his treatises when he talked about that the theme dictates everything, right? Not the other way around. Whatever melody you have in front of you, whether you composed yourself, whether somebody else has given it to you, whether you took this theme from the pre-existing melodies, right? This theme probably has the inner workings of your form, of your style, anything that will come out of it, because it's encoded basically in the theme itself. Don't you agree? Right.
No, I think that's totally right. It might be interesting for folks listening to this. There are archived on YouTube a couple of workshops that I did for the AGO some years ago. And a lot of it is about that idea of looking very deeply at the themes that we play and figuring out how our treatment of them can kind of organically be related. They're very simple kinds of ideals, but especially the way that they're played out in that particular workshop. But I think that's definitely something I would hope to work towards in any more complex kinds of things I might work on too. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I'll make sure I will put those links to those workshops in the description of this podcast.
Oh, great!
Because I agree. It's very helpful to look at how you are teaching and how you are demonstrating to people, and try this thing in practice. Yeah, not only in theory, but hands-on experience. Great. So Tom, in your daily routine as a church organist, do you improvise more than you perform pre-existing compositions? What's the balance of improvisation and performance for you?
Yeah, sure. I think in terms of hymn playing, I would say I do improvise a lot more than I would use other resources for how to treat hymns. I rarely use, other reharmonizations or introductions and that thing that are published in and tend to just try to let those be spontaneous in the moment. Although I do prepare them, but not something that I tend to write out.
Mm-hmm.
In the programs that I play, almost always there are some elements of improvisation, but I've never been one to say that I love improvising more than playing the great composers. So I always do look forward to playing literature by all means. And one of the things I've done so often over the years is to play silent film accompaniments,
mm-hmm.
which is a very kind of unusual, although it's getting more usual now, I think, in this particular time. But it's been an unusual thing for me to think about that, because those are just such giant endeavors. Some of the movies are 2 hours long, and so anybody anybody that has to play anything for that long, golly, that's a challenge. But to keep your brain and your wits about you, so those are programs where I improvise 100% of the time. So,
I would.
So I think
fantastically. I would die to not only to listen how you do this, but also listen to you talk about the process of accompanying silent films. So maybe that's the topic for the future also. Wonderful.
All right.
you just keep doing the generous work that you do, and I think more and more people will start to be less afraid of trying those magical things in their practice. And who knows, maybe more organists will also try to accompany silent movies as well.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, in your liturgical playing, I know you are music director at First-Plymouth Church, right, in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Yes.
That's the great place with a very large, I believe, Schoenstein organ, right?
Correct.
And
right.
Very fantastic place, very great musical tradition there. I remember going into many concerts myself when I was doing my doctorate there, and at UNL, and
Mm-hmm.
and Tom, when you improvise for liturgy, you mentioned you have a formal plan in your mind, right? Do you sometimes improvise without any preparation as well? Like in the moment?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there are times, if we're honest, in service playing where we don't necessarily know what's going to happen,
mm-hmm.
and we didn't know we were going to need to do anything. But so the pastor forgot his notes, or the communion takes longer than we expected, or the procession isn't done, and you're almost to the end of the hymn. And so I think, there are all kinds of things that can happen. I think also, if you're open to the feeling of, this is what I love about service playing, you're open to what ends up transpiring in the liturgy, whether it was from a particular way the pastor's sermon affected what happened next in the service, or the way that people sang the closing hymn had a particular impact. Well, then, whatever you might be playing, for the closing voluntary that day, or for the communion improvisation, even if you had a great idea going in, it may not feel right to you in your gut. And so, I think there are times where you trust the context of the situation, and then you. One of the things I often tell people is, sometimes we don't feel that we're that prepared for one particular thing, but we have to realize our whole life has been in preparation for the moment we're about to see. And I lean on that a lot. It's as though all the time I spent as a musician, since my first Suzuki piano lesson, through all those years in the choir, through all those organ lessons, through all those theory classes, through all those choir rehearsals I've led, all of that leads us to a particular place, and we can lean on all of that in any particular moment. Every music piece we've ever heard or played or seen, that all becomes a part of what we can offer in a particular moment. And so I think that's an important perspective for us to have too.
Well, exactly, because those pieces, those musical ideas that we heard in the past or played in the past, right, will dictate how we will behave in this moment, right? Unless we,
I hope so.
Unless we panicked so much that we freeze and can't really move a leg or a finger, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But that's another extreme feeling, right? Panic. By the way, Tom, how would you recommend people deal with a panic during the performance, whether it's improvisation or written out composition? How would you recommend people react to this feeling, which is inevitable probably for many of us?
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely. I mean, for any of us, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind. One is be aware of your breath as much as you can, and it's never going to hurt to be mindful of our breath in a difficult moment. I mean, that's never going to hurt us. I think in terms of improvising in a difficult moment, what I would say is our tendency would be to try to keep a lot of things going and for it to sound like we're lost. And maybe the thing would be, let that be a moment for the pedal to play something on its own, or in other words, to simplify and untangle, and then see which one of those threads is going to pull you into something new. So I think of those two things. I know I've leaned on those two things more than once.
But that's extremely helpful.
Yeah, and I think to give ourselves permission that everybody, something I've also realized is everybody in any given room, no matter how snarky they are, we've all had those times where we've needed the grace of another chance. And so I can remember a couple of times in my career saying, I'm going to start this one again, and it's not the end of the world, so there's that too.
Right. So perfectionism is not really helpful, right? Here, to think that I must to play perfectly, right? From the beginning until the end, this counterpoint must be perfect, right? This canon must be without any dissonances, right? It's not really probably helpful to limit yourself so much that you even can't breathe, right?
No, that's right, and I think that's exactly right. There are stressful situations, being in like the competitions and things like that. But I think, as you're getting ready for really what you anticipate as being really stressful things, then you have to go about putting yourself in positions that have some stress preparing for that. And that's helpful too. If you're getting ready for a recital and the first time you play it in front of people is when you're actually in the recital, that's dangerous. If it's so much better to have a group of people come and hear it before that, and to see what happens when somebody's looking at you. Or I think also as an improviser to take recordings of, which is so much easier to do now than it was, to take recordings of yourself and to listen to them, not necessarily that same day when you remember what you did, but a few days later to see if you can understand what the form is, what you can follow what's happening. Or does it just sound like there's just a bunch of stuff going on? And so, because you have to remember, the person listening to the improvisation is not inside your head. And so they don't know exactly what you're trying to do. You have to be able to get out of your own head and on the other side and discern if someone's going to be able to hear what you actually are doing. And so,
what you're saying probably that a person has to be able to communicate, right? It's a musical language, basically. It's another way of communicating and sharing ideas, sharing stories, probably telling stories that people can relate to. And sometimes
I think that's right. And there's...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think, you know, you used the word earlier of talking about perfection, and I think of it more as a place of ultimate authenticity. You know, that what we do is so true to us, but it's so informed from everything we've studied and learned as well, and yet in that particular moment it becomes the absolute most compelling thing from our heart and mind and body and spirit that we can offer. And that to me is the kind of thing that can communicate. It may not be perfect, but it's going to have a musical ideal and sensitivity and connection that cannot be denied. You know, and to me, that's the goal.
Right. And you know what's interesting? When you improvise, when you try to connect with people in an authentic way, people tend to forgive you more than they would forgive you for playing the wrong notes in a real pre-existing composition, right? Did you notice that?
That's true, yeah. No, I think you're right. There's a grace in some ways because people understand this is unfolding, you know, in someone's mind. I think there is a sort of unwritten rule of what you just described. Right.
So when you improvise, of course, you can be very modern in your sounds, right? Quite harsh sometimes, right? And what's fascinating to me, Tom, is that, for example, if you are playing a recital of modern sounding music, which was composed before by somebody in our organ world, right? Like a master, let's say Tournemire, or let's say Messiaen, right? Anybody from those days, very dissonant sometimes music, right? And you compare to that feeling with your own improvisations. You could improvise in any of those styles, in your own style, making modern sounding pieces right in the moment. And you know what's fascinating? That people would love your spontaneous improvisations, even though they you know, feel it's very dissonant composition and technically very challenging and difficult to perceive in your mind the sounds that you're recreating. They would appreciate it much more than real modern compositions, don't you think?
I think you're right. That sometimes how I have thought of that is it sounds like sometimes pieces sound like somebody was improvising. They're not distinguishable in some way from something that could be necessarily sort of spontaneously, like something spontaneously evoked could convey a similar kind of spirit. And I think you're right that to know you're the only ones in the history of the world that are ever hearing that as it's unfolding, you know, there's something different about that naturally than just to say, I'm going to open up this case, not as beautiful as it is, I'm going to open up this case from the museum and show you what's inside of it. You know, it's a different kind of connection that we can make. I think you're right. Not better or worse, but just different,
exactly. That's what I noticed in my performances whenever I play modern music and whenever I improvise modern sounding music as well. So people tend to react more engagingly, basically engage more in spontaneous music making than pre-existing pieces. Of course, it's a factor of being familiar with the music, and of course, if you are improvising it for the first time, it's completely unfamiliar, right? And if you are playing modern sounding music which was written by somebody else, it's also unknown, it's also unfamiliar, right? So both factors are the same, but somehow improvisation makes you feel more alive, makes you feel more, as you say, vulnerable, and that's a level where people can connect with you even more. Yeah,
I think that's right.
So Tom, fantastic interview, fantastic insights. And before we end this conversation, can you tell us just one thing that you wish you knew when you first started improvising?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I certainly wished I would have known how many people would have been willing to help me figure it out better. And so I guess what I mean by that is, now that I've been kind of growing up in this, I realize what a small world it is of people that care super deeply about this improvisation thing. And I sense that every one of them is always open to having conversations and to give advice and to offer support and encouragement and inspiration. And so anybody that's loosely interested, don't think any of us don't want you to contact us, but I love having a chance to hear from people who are excited about improvisation and who want something to lean on to grow a little bit more. So I wish I hadn't been quite so shy about that part of it as a kid.
So what you're saying, Tom, is so priceless because probably people like you who are entering this new world, right, of improvisation, entering or at least having a glimpse, to take a glimpse into this new world of possibilities, right? They start to share things in common with you, right? Whoever is on the other continent improvising, and you yourself in America, right? And you have those things to discuss, and you are both insiders somehow, right? Insiders of this craft, of this art, mysterious art sometimes. And yes, you are sort of from one tribe, right? And you can understand each other, right? That nobody else can understand you. No musician, Tom, can understand you unless he or she is improviser, right?
Yeah, and I think the idea of, once anybody who's willing to start improvising, realize we're all in the same club together, and we're all just figuring out from wherever we might happen to be, and it's not as mysterious and mystical in some ways as in the relationships, anyways, that can support and sustain us as improvisers are not as mystical and mysterious as the art itself. So, and elusive. So, I mean, don't be shy about reaching out to people to help you and to nurture you and encourage you, and vice versa. So, that's important.
Fantastic. And of course, don't be afraid of being aware of your breath, right? When improvisation, when panic attacks you during the performance, right? That really can save you. And as you say, you can simplify things. Play a solo melody in the pedals, in the hands, right? And then you can go from there whenever you are recovered, basically.
Absolutely. The theme is your best friend, for sure.
Fantastic ending. The theme is your best friend, Tom. And could you tell us a link where our listeners can find more about you and your work online?
Yeah, thank you. Definitely you can check concertorganist.com, which would share with you things from the Karen McFarlane artists, and also my church's website has a lot of interesting things too, and a YouTube channel, and that's first-plymouth.org.
Fantastic. I'll make sure I will put those things into the description of this podcast.
Thank you.
And I hope we will keep in touch. You will have so much things to offer to the organ world. I have no doubt. And people whoever will be listening to us from 89 countries, they will at least will try their hand in improvisation, right? Try to sit on the organ bench for 10 minutes playing something which was not written
Absolutely.
before. For 10 minutes. It's the most scariest experience in my life, probably. Those 10 minutes when I was, having no music, no pre-existing melodies, but it had to be with myself and my own feelings. Did you have this experience, by the way?
Yeah, and I think what you're saying, one of the things I often think about is, if you happen to be on a trip somewhere and you suddenly walk into a church and you see this incredible organ, and you happen to see somebody and you say, "Oh, I'm an organist," and they say, "Well, we'd be happy to have you come up and play," and then you say, "Oh, I don't have any music."
Right, that's the worst thing you can say.
Yes, you do. I'm sure you do. Deep down inside of you, you have some music that's just longing to come out. And so I encourage people to figure out how that's wanting to sound and what they can give and how good that can feel to share the music that comes from within.
Do you know what people fear the most? I think more than improvisation. Deep inside, I think they fear more of going out with their songs still inside them.
Mm-hmm.
That's another,
Wow.
That's a very powerful way of thinking. I've heard it someplace, or I think Seth Godin, the blogger, talks about that fear at the end of your life, right? When you think back about the things that you did, and if you didn't live a meaningful life, you feel like your songs are still inside you, right? So in a way, it's a metaphor, but sometimes it's a literal representation. If you have musical ideas that were longing to come out and you were, too scared to let it happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
that's right. No.
So let's use this time while still we have this in our lives, wisely and
sure.
purposefully. Amen.
For sure. Amen.
Amen, yes. So, fantastic work and inspiration, Tom, from around the world to you. And I hope you will have a tremendously brave and creative year ahead of you. And stay healthy.
Well, thank you so much, and you too. It's good to talk to you today.
Great. So, we will talk about those silent movies next time, perhaps, and our listeners will find out so much about how you can do magical things with your hands and feet while cinema is going on the screen and you are on the bench, right?
Sure, absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much.
And have fun improvising.
Thank you. Blessings to you too.
If you liked this conversation, I encourage you to visit my blog Secrets of Organ Playing at organduo.lt, where you will find lots of insights, practical advice and training for every area of organ playing. You can subscribe to this blog for free to get your daily dose of inspiration and to be the first to know when any of my future podcasts roll out. I hope to help you reach your dreams in organ playing. I'm Vidas Pinkevicius. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you online really soon.